Welcome back to DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, to part 2 of our 2024 driver review. Now, again, I don't normally do this, but if you haven't listened to last week's episode, I definitely recommend you listen to that one first, otherwise you'll sort of not have a clue what's going on for this episode. So listen to last week's episode and then move swiftly on to this one. But for this episode, we are going to do part 2 of the 2024 driver tier list. So we have the top 15 in the 2024 standings to go over. And like we did last week, we will rank them in 5 different categories, depending on how we saw their season. It gives us a little opportunity to delve into every driver season as we did the first half last week. So as I said, there's 15 to go over this week. And well, let's not wait around. I'm joined by the same two as last week, Archie and Fleur. Let's keep this on the road. Let's kick off with number 15 in the standings, who was Marcus Ericsson. Made the big move to Andretti ahead of the season, obviously switching over from Chip Ganassi Racing. It's a season that I think was definitely underwhelming. Ericsson did have a lot of bad luck. I'm not going to deny that. Obviously, had a mechanical in St. Pete, crashed with Blancfors in the Indy 500. Suffered crashes in Toronto, mechanical failure running well in Gateway, crashed with Newgarden in Milwaukee, crashed at Nashville. So that's a lot of drop points. And Ericsson was underwhelming. But even when you take into those factors into account, he never really had the pace of Kirkwood or Herta on a race-to-race basis. Look, there were some races, Detroit, he did well, but he never felt like he was on the same level as Kirkwood, and certainly not the same level as Herta, which is a bit disappointing because Ericsson was sort of this guy. He's really consistent. He's a serial top 10 finisher with Ganassi. He's a reliable pair of hands. And this season, that wasn't really him by any means. I think he had 8 top 10s throughout the course of the season, which isn't bad. But did we expect more? We probably did. One podium, again, probably expected more. Again, look, there was a few missed out on. Gateway, he could have got one. Milwaukee, he could have got one. But he made quite a few of his own mistakes, which again isn't very Ericsson-like. So it was an underwhelming year for sure for Marcus Ericsson.
Well, yeah, you mentioned he had 8 top 10s. He had 14 last season in his final season with Ganassi. He'd been 6th place in the championship for the 3 years prior to joining Andretti, and it's not like Andretti were in this kind of slump that it felt like they were in heading into this year. They as a team really seem to make a step forward this year, and I think it's pretty significant that Ericsson was kind of so far off. Well, not so far off, but kind of over the course of the season, he was lagging pretty far behind his teammates. And okay, Indy was one that stood out that you mentioned. That was kind of his own doing that he was in that position in the first place, having crashed. It was just a nightmare of a month of May after, winning it in 22, contending again in 23. It just wasn't, it wasn't this, well, it wasn't what we've become accustomed to with Ericsson, which is that kind of reliable consistency. The peaks were there to an extent. He had 4 top 5 finishes. That was the same that he managed last season with Ganassi. It was just those days that we kind of have coined Marcus Ericsson days that I just don't feel like we saw enough of them really. And okay, maybe, if it wasn't for certain things, and I'm not denying there was bad luck, then he could have been much better off than, 15th in the standings is incredibly poor. I think it's an incredibly disappointing season, to be honest.
Yeah, I think 15th in the standings versus 7th and 2nd of his teammates is quite surprising. It's really not like that Andretti was a bad car this year at all. There was a lot of potential there, and it very wasn't the season I think a lot of people expected for him. Yeah, like you said, bad luck, but there's bad luck and then there's just a bad season. There's like a one-off and then there's a consistent just struggle, really, that it kind of felt like this season from him.
He finished outside the top 15 9 times, which is really far flung from what we've been used to seeing from him.
He also had the worst oval average of any full-timer bar leg of anybody, which is it's not what we expect from an Indy 500 winner.
No.
And that's with 2 top 10s in there as well. So, not what you'd expect from him. Yeah, look, you can maybe give an excuse first season where he's integrating in the team, but that lasts for one season. Next season, there's got to be a big step up from Ericsson because there was the biggest step up. Andretti, noticeably one from Herta and a decent one from Kirkwood. But next year's got to be a big year for Ericsson. So, where's he going?
For me, he falls in bump day survived. I think this is the one where you have to weigh it against expectation and weigh it against what we've seen in recent years, and he was miles off that.
I have all the bump day survivors in bump day survivor. I know Rahal isn't. I was about to say we've almost got a trend where all the bump day survivors are actually in bump day survivors, but Rahal didn't make it. Then we move on to the similarly first names, Marcus Armstrong in his second year of Ganassi, his first year doing a full program, including the ovals, and it's a bit like Ericsson. We became accustomed to Armstrong getting quite a lot of top tens last year. It didn't feel like he made many mistakes throughout the course of last season. There was a bit of that this year, but there was a bit more peak performance in the same side. I would say what did impress me was Armstrong's oval performance in his first season. Qualifying wise, he had an average of 12th on ovals, which look, that's better than Dixon, his teammate, for example, as well as Lundqvist and Simpson, which I thought was pretty good in qualifying. And then results wise, average of 17th. That does take into account the Indy 500 though, and the Milwaukee 2 crash, which isn't really a fair representative because obviously had a mechanical at the Indy 500. But he got 3 top 10s on ovals in his first year doing a full program, as I said, and it was a bit of a topsy-turvy year. It felt like one race he'd be really on it. The next race would be a bit messy. He got 3 top 5s across the course of the year. He obviously got a podium he got 4 top 5s, including a podium in Detroit. But there were races, St. Petersburg, he had a crash, but mechanicals in Indianapolis, mechanical in Road America. Obviously got sort of responsible for the crash at Milwaukee too. So a bit of a topsy-turvy year, maybe a bit more clumsy than we saw last year, but I feel he did make progress in comparison to last year, for sure.
Yeah, I think you've been quite harsh on Armstrong actually at points. I think it's quite hard to kind of put it into an accurate picture, really. Yes, he's in a Ganassi car. Also, he's still adapting to kind of this American style of racing, and I think ultimately the way he did adapt to ovals really did impress me. I think at least 3 of his top 10 finishes came on ovals, and that was, his first oval race experience didn't come until Iowa, essentially, given how early his Indy 500 finished. So I think he was pretty consistent, and when he wasn't consistent, he was often actually unlucky. I don't really recall that many mistakes from him. Even the Milwaukee one, that was more so Lundqvist's fault. I think the big one, obviously, that stands out is Road America, obviously ending the competitive running of himself and Lundqvist having started so far up the field. But I feel like we've seen Armstrong kind of, 11 top 12 qualifying results, for instance, is pretty good going. And it did really feel like there were times where he was, we saw it a bit last year as well. He was matching Dixon at times, maybe not Palou, obviously, but yeah, I thought it was a solid year. I think the peak level wasn't as good as Lundqvist, as we'll kind of get on. We got onto last week, didn't we? Of course, but I think the consistency was there. I think it's, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel last year it was nice to see a top 10 finisher, whilst this year there was a lot of random.
He finished in the top 10 5 times last year. He got 8 this year.
But 3 of them were ovals. So
yes, no,
I guess
it kind of balances it out.
Yeah.
But again, he got the top. He got 4 top 5s this year. He didn't finish in the top.
Yeah,
5
no, I do agree.
Yeah, I think he's made a step up this year from last year. And when you think as well, it is his first full program season, and ovals. That's a whole different kind of preparation to just road courses. Granted, I'm slightly biased, but I think he's done very well this season. I think he's had a pretty decent run again, podium, top 5 finishes, still a decent amount of top 10 finishes. He's had some rough races, some bad luck, or his own fault, but I don't think it's been inconsistency necessarily. I think he's been pretty strong throughout the season, especially in comparison to some of his much more experienced teammates.
Now, I don't think he impressed me as much as Lundqvist did this year, is what I'm going to personally say.
I agree.
I agree with that.
I think he slots him in just behind Lundqvist.
Yeah, okay, I agree.
Middle section.
I think both of them have been very similar performance-wise, but in very different ways. We've had this discussion a few times. If you're a team owner, would you rather take Armstrong? Would you rather take Lundqvist? Both deserve to be in the field, I think. Armstrong will obviously be in the field of Shank next year. Lundqvist likely not. But you say I've been harsh on Armstrong. Maybe I have been. But I still think he does deserve a seat somewhere. I think he's proved enough to deserve. He's good enough of an IndyCar driver to deserve more chances.
I agree. I think Lundqvist, ultimately you have to rank him higher because it has been, their seasons have been so similar, and you felt like, especially on the ovals, they were constantly kind of finding themselves together on track, or they were qualifying very similarly as kind of the best two cars in the team at points. But just the fact it was Lundqvist's rookie year, and he had these peaks that were probably better than anything we've seen from Armstrong in the last 2 seasons. I think he just about edges it. But yeah, very, very close between them.
I didn't say this last week for some reason, but a stat I found for you viewers, Carl Larson is the best qualifying average of anybody this year. Pretty clearly did one race, but
sample size.
That's a fun little statistic in like 20 years' time. Who had the best qualifying average in 2024? People will be going on for ages, and the answer is Carl Larson. So.
A very biased, fun little statistic.
Look, people say don't read too much in the statistics. I'm reading it as Carl Larson is IndyCar's best ever qualifier. So. Will Power didn't get a pole this year, and he's supposedly IndyCar's best ever qualifier. To say Carl Larson isn't. Archie, you ready for this one? Rena's VK.
Yes, I am.
Here comes the monologue.
I've done my monologues. Just look back at the season review.
2 hours episode for this one. I'm joking. VK. He definitely made a step up. I mean, I say the team made a step up. In fairness, he obviously did as well, but the team definitely made a step up in comparison to last year. Qualifying wise, VK, let's see how he fared. Average of 16th. It's all right. He got 4 top 12s in there. Not too bad. Not fantastic. But the races, he was a lot strong. I think ovals, I pointed this out a few times. VK's average on ovals is the 5th best of any driver this year, which is quite, well, very respectable. It's an average of 9, which is pretty good from VK. Decent season. A decent season. As much as maybe you'll say I'm harsh at VK all the time, but look, I've said this a few times. VK is like, we don't really notice him. He's there. He doesn't really do much wrong. He doesn't really do anything flashy, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But he's just there and he does the right job. I mean, who knows what his IndyCar future's going to look like? Who even knows he's going to be in the field next year?
I think that is more of a team thing than him. Like, they had a shocking 2023. That was why they ended up getting rid of Daly after 7 races, and it absolutely didn't work. Like, other than maybe a bit of leadership from Hunter Ray that maybe rubbed it off a bit on VK. I know he's kind of spoken about the fact that has helped somewhat. I think this year was so much better than last year. I think from the team side, and then kind of from his side as well. It's again, having only been at a single team, it's really hard to judge the true level. I think it's the flashes like Indy. That was, I know I've mentioned it time and time again. His qualifying performance after the crash was pretty heroic.
He was the one who crashed it.
He was the one who crashed it, of course. Yeah, of course he was. But at the same time, to then rebound as he did, like, I think that was super impressive. 7 top 10 finishes compared to 2 last year. So it's a big jump forward. Yeah, I mean, we've exhausted it, haven't we? Talking about him. 13th in the championship.
You've exhausted it. I don't think I have yet.
13th in the championship. Like, again, it's super consistency, really, for a team that has fluctuated so much in performance, I would say. Obviously no better than 12th, but also no worse than 14th in his entire IndyCar career. So, I mean, will he get a seat? He certainly deserves one. But again, it kind of feels like a Lundqvist situation.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything that's been said. I think I'm kind of on Dan's side with he's kind of just there. Like, you don't really notice him until you actually go back and look at it. He's never really doing anything to go, oh my God, look, it's VK doing so well. But he's also not like, oh my God, there's VK in a wall, you know? He's kind of just having a strong season. And I mean, that's also very impressive to not gain notice. because I think sometimes you're like, oh, if I don't think of them, that means they had a bad season, but actually he had a very like consistent, very strong season this year, like we've said, in comparison to past years. So I think he's actually done pretty well.
And let's just put it into perspective. Dan, you've probably got the stats up about how many mechanicals or how many, I don't know, that he was victim of any crashes.
I was about to say this. He had one mechanical all year, according to my notes in Laguna.
Okay, that's one mechanical retirement, I would assume, because he had several different issues.
Yes.
Whether, I think I remember Road America, Indy Road Course.
Harbour qualifying.
Harbour qualifying was a huge one because he looked like a real pole contender there, and all of a sudden was sent to the back of the field with electrical issue, maybe. I think. Trying to remember,
but I was going to say, do you remember anything VK's done wrong? Bar the 500 qualifying, because I don't.
No, not really, not at all. And I mean, he's finished inside the top 15 all bar 5 races, including the final 8 races. It was that early season patch that I think really cost him. I mean, he was only 12 points off finishing 11th in the standings. I mean, if it wasn't for all of these mechanical issues and his car constantly breaking down, like, I think he could have. I mean, I'm not saying he would have been in the top 10 fight, but at the same time, he probably would have been a couple of places higher.
That was
and I know you. That
was the running joke at Indy 500, wasn't it? Every week we were just laughing at VK's bad luck. I'd say he's probably top of middle. I don't think he's done enough to quite have that dog. Well, I think he's top of middle.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I agree with
that. I think he's I'd say pretty on par with Lundqvist again, with the rookie factor for Lundqvist.
Like if we look at Malukas above, I don't think he was quite on his peak performance level. But yeah, no one monologues for you, Archie, if he goes. So what are you going to do?
It's fine. He'll be back for it. They'd be stupid not to snap him up for Indy, wouldn't they? Ganassi.
Yeah, no. This is someone will snap him up for Indy at the very least. So, yeah. Otherwise, no one monologues for you next year. What are you going to do? Felix Rosenqvist is next on the list, and a bit of an odd season because he started off. Whoa, this is what a signing this was. You know, he took the pole at Long Beach. He had 2 top 5s in the first 3 races. He had 4 top 10s in the first 4 races. Podium in Thermal, group pole at Thermal. I know it doesn't count for anything, but who cares? And then it sort of just tailed off. It was more of a team issue, I think, on this occasion. I mean, Rosenqvist did have some bad luck, you know, mechanical failure at Indianapolis, mechanical in Iowa, mechanical in Toronto, although he did crash into Ericsson before that, but we'll ignore that. And obviously a victim of the tyre in Nashville. So he had a lot of bad luck, did Rosenqvist, towards the end of the years. It's like sort of flip with VKs, if that makes sense. Maybe there was like some weird conspiracy theory where the luck just switched halfway through. But yeah, after the 500, it sort of just unfortunately went a bit downhill for Rosenqvist, not through much fault of his own, but it was a move which I think we'd all comfortably say panned out better than we thought it would do. And he's certainly impressed. I think there were doubts at Aaron McLaren where he was just so inconsistent. But he sort of felt like a real resurgent leader at Shank. Look, we've spoken about this a few times. Shank got, 1 top 10 the entirety of the whole of last season. Now, Rosenqvist alone got 6. So it's clearly a step up, isn't it?
I mean, to come away disappointed with 6 top 10s, or relatively disappointed after the season that they had the year prior, I think it speaks volumes really about the step forward they've made. I know the Andretti Alliance, it did seem to me through the season that there was a lot more talk of the Andretti Alliance and that collaboration. Obviously now that's turned into an alliance with Ganassi for Meyer Shank for next year, which I imagine will just take them from strength to strength again if all pans out well. But yeah, I think Rosenqvist didn't really have an issue of it. It wasn't an issue of him not converting in races as such. I mean, I even recall like the Indy Road Course. I think he got hit or spun in the first corner. Was it Road America or one of the road courses that always merge into one that he got spun by Rob and sent to the back again near the start? To be fair, I think that was one where he qualified a bit worse, but still. I think for Rosenqvist, the thing that really reflects the performance there is the fact that he qualified inside the top 12 13 times, inside the top 3 on 6 occasions, which is unbelievable for a team that qualified inside the top 10 twice in 2023. Like, I think it was a great year, and yeah, it was just a bit of misfortune really as it progressed.
Yeah, I think it's a shame that his second half of the season couldn't have carried on quite as strong as that opening stint, because I think actually without a few of those like mechanical issues being hit, things like that, he could have had an incredible season. But equally, just the beginning of that season shows the step up that like he and obviously Maya Shank have made, and it was impressive. Yeah, basically.
His qualifying performance is so impressive. I'm looking at it now. Same amount of fast 12s as Newgarden, more fast 12s than Herta. That is crazy, especially Herta with the Alliance as well. Like he's on average, he was only no, actually, my list is wrong here. So he did qualify better than Herta.
He was in the top 12 more than Palou as well.
No, sorry, he was actually the 7th best qualifier on the entire season. 5th best of people who did all the races. That's insane. Far better average than all the Andretti's. That's ridiculous. I'd say top of got that dog.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Considering everybody else that didn't even do a full season. So we're just judging off 5 races, 1 race, 3 races, 6 races, or whatever it was. So yeah, he's got to go in there. Then we go on to Christian Lundgaard. We found this so difficult for Fittipaldi and Rahal last week, and I think this is equally as difficult with Christian Lundgaard in his final season of Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing, because the team clearly made a step back in performance. Last year it was, you got the win in Toronto, you got several more top 5s, and Lundgaard really looked like leading sort of the RLL resurgence in many ways last year, and that just really did not reflect this year. He got the 1 podium in the Indy Road Course, but 5 top 10s throughout the course of the year. You think, oh, actually, it felt like maybe in comparison to what he did last year, where I count up now, he
had 9
top 10s and down to 5. And look, there's the stats also reflect for Rahal as well, so it's not necessarily a Lundgaard issue. He was a bit anonymous, as I said, it's not a bad thing, and he made his mistakes. He crushed up one of the Iowas. But yeah, he definitely didn't have the peak performance. His overall performance wasn't good. And this was one thing I did want to highlight, actually, that his overall results, I think, were really disappointing in truth. I mean, if you look at his overall qualifying, only Legg has got a worse average than Lundgaard for any full-timer, which is a bit concerning, especially when you're going to a team such as Aaron McLaren, whose standards for ovals are so much higher. Lundgaard's best qualifying on oval this year was 19th, which is somebody who's now in their 3rd full season should really be doing better. And next year, he needs to prove that he is a good oval driver. You have the excuse of RLL that the package is awful, but with McLaren, that excuse just isn't there. So that's going to be a big test. But overall, like, his year was okay, a bit underwhelming. But as I said, it's more of a team issue, I think, than a personal issue.
It's a funny one, because we came into this year saying if RLL can crack it on ovals, they could be like a title contending team, because they were kind of that good. On road courses, they were arguably the best team in the series last year, maybe other than Ganassi. Street course, I mean, that's obviously where Lundgaard got his win in Toronto last year. But this year, I mean, the ovals took a minor step forward on some fronts and a slightly above minor step back on other occasions, especially the last couple of ovals that were visited. I think there's just such gulfs between, Lundgaard his qualifying average was 24th on ovals and 6th on road courses. Like, there's such a big gulf there. But I do feel like as a whole, RLL took a step back on all fronts, really. I just don't feel like Lundgaard had the same capability to fight as he did last year. I mean, he was in the top 5 4 times last year. He probably should have been on the podium more than just the 1 win. And he was in the top 5 once, and that was his podium, which, I mean, to be fair, he could have won that race on the Indy Road Course, but that was about as good as it got for RLL this year. And it didn't get close to being that good again.
I remember saying post-race that they probably should have won that. And they could have done better, and they left this point of, I just slandered his over qualifying. If I look at his road street qualifying, actually his average is 8.4, and he's the 6th best qualifier of anyone with 8 fast 12s out of 10.
And that's with a package that, well, judging off Rahal's kind of regression this season that seems to have taken a step back as well. So I think that's really impressive. That he still finished 11th in the championship is superb, really, given some of the struggles.
Yeah, I think if you obviously ignore his overall performances, you could say he had a pretty decent season, at least qualifying side. But the issue is those overall performances do exist, and the overall qualifying does exist, and it is a very important part of IndyCar. Especially in his third season, you would kind of expect him to be more consistent. Like, sure, you might be better on road courses, but you'd expect not as massive as a gap in those qualifying performances, especially for him. But again, it's hard when teams have taken a step back to really judge where he's at, because that performance is kind of like marred by that team development or not development.
Actually, it's funny we speak about it. One day we're recording, sort of the first time we've actually seen it in Papaya. I think he'll challenge O'Ward on road and street, maybe even have a close enough upper edge. But when it comes to oval, which O'Ward is pretty much the best oval driver in the series, bar maybe Newgarden and maybe McLaughlin. So time will tell. As I alluded to, it's going to be a big challenge, and it's going to be a very important one for Lundgaard to actually assess where he is. We know Pato O'Ward is a top-level IndyCar driver. By the way, he's beaten teammates like Alexander Rossi and Felix Rosenqvist more than comfortably. Aaron McLaren still aren't there of his package, but at least we can compare him to somebody like Pato O'Ward, who we know is a top-tier driver. So time will tell. Very important year. Look, Indy 500 as well. He's going to have a big Indy 500 because that's what the expectation will be. Right. I'd probably say middle.
Yeah. It's definitely no worse than that.
Whereas he's probably he's in this cluster here.
I
whereabouts
would put him between Lundqvist and Armstrong.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not against that. Right, time will tell for Christian Lundgaard. Let's go on to the man he is replacing, Alexander Rossi, who is heading to Ed Carpenter Racing. That's actually a nice side note. He's going to be testing for the team next week. We'll cover this in next week's episode, but he'll be testing at the Indianapolis Open Test. Lundgaard will be there for McLaren. Daly's back for Hunkos. Helio's back, and Hunter Ray's back. Just so you know.
For Dreyer and
Reinbold, yeah. Siegel's also doing his rookie orientation practice again, but that's not really that interesting, really.
And Dale Coyne have a TBD, the first TBD of 2025, and it's not even 2025.
But yes, so Rossi jumped moving to Ed Carpenter last season with Arrow. McLaren finished 10th in the standings. Where did he finish last year? Was that 10th as well? Or was that 9th? It was 9th and 10th. He was
9th last season.
Year. 5th season in a row, he's come 9th or 10th. He said at the start of the season he wanted to get out of that slump. He didn't. It was okay. I don't think he made a huge step up on last year. One podium at Laguna Seca. But in fairness to Rossi, he probably did have the upper hand on O'Ward on road and street courses as a whole. I think O'Ward was probably because O'Ward made quite a few more mistakes than Rossi did. Because Rossi's average on road and street was actually about half a position better than O'Ward's, in fairness. His qualifying was a bit down, but look, Rossi was consistent. He got 3 top 5s. If we're looking at top 10s, Rossi got 10 top 10s or 17 races, which isn't bad, but he still lacks the peak performance we saw from him 5-6 years ago, which I think is what people are looking for from Rossi, because they know he can do it. He had a good 500 as well, was in the mix to win, but yeah, I think Rossi's placed maybe a bit harsher expectations because of what he's done previously in his IndyCar career. It wasn't underwhelming. It wasn't overwhelming. It was decent. It's probably what we expected out of Rossi, but it wasn't flashy by any means.
I actually think he was pretty unlucky this year. I can't see any of these bad results and think of he just had a terrible race there. Like, I'm just looking at some of his results. Barber, his wheel fell off. Road America, that was where he had some issue with some technical problem. Second Iowa race where he finished 15th was when he was had Rob that and Rob vaulting him. Toronto, obviously missed Toronto. Gateway
restart
again. I wouldn't say that was his fault. Nashville, I think he vented on the podcast that he was on some awful strategy.
Well, to be fair, Rossi's strategist, Brian Bartlett, Rossi's always played some really weird strategies. Have you ever noticed this? He's always just
Well, it was Indy as well. He was I mean, there was some fuel concerns, weren't there, late in the race, and that probably barred him from possibly winning. I mean, he had a brilliant Indy 500, it must be said. He was the best Aaron McLaren car until race day, maybe even race day if it wasn't for this fuel issue. But yeah, I mean, I don't think he made a sizable step forward on last year. I think having 10 top 10s in his 16 races ultimately isn't a fair reflection. He probably could have been in the top 10 3 or 4 more times if it wasn't for things happening completely out of his control that were kind of more a reflection on the team needing to brush up a bit some of the time. He had half the top 5s as last year, which is disappointing. Obviously, one podium compared to one podium. But I think it was a better year than his results reflect, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I feel like actually looking at them, it doesn't feel like they show how I felt like he was driving some of the time and what I feel like he should have been getting this season with his performances. Like, I feel like there should have been a lot more top 5 finishes. I feel like he could have gotten. And yeah, it wasn't like a bad season by any stretch. It just wasn't outstanding for him, but it's kind of where he's been the last few years. It doesn't feel completely out of the park of what was expected from him. Maybe obviously for himself it was out of the park of what he expected, if he expected to get out of the top 9 or 10 finishes by the end of the season, but it doesn't feel crazy in comparison to the last few years.
I think with Rossi, when he joined McLaren, the expectation was how will he fare against O'Ward, because he is a seasoned veteran of the series. And again, like Ericsson, I said, first year you can kind of excuse it, adapting to the team, different engine, etc. But second year, he didn't make that step up in comparison. Right, he probably did, but quite quietly. Like, O'Ward got 6 top 2s, Rossi got none. Like, Rossi's got 2 podiums in 2 years, whilst O'Ward's got 13. So like, it's okay, but Ed Carpenter's going to be a much more bigger role for him, sort of team leader and trying to bring his team back forward. So, tier list wise, I'd say top of Ohio.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is so much easier than last week. Santino Ferrucci. Look, we have said a lot about Ferrucci's season over the course of various different episodes, but the stats don't lie. 1 top 10 all of last year, 11 this year, most for a Ford driver in well over 20 years. A pole position, 2 top 5s. Yes, he's pretty much driving a Penske car, is what people will say, and that's a fair assessment. But they're never going to be on the resources of Penske, are they? And Ferrucci's season was utterly sensational when you consider the step up that the team made. Again, Penske did help, but you can't blame that all on Penske. And look, he absolutely obliterated Rob. He completely embarrassed his teammate. And the step up in performance was clearly there. Like, it was a great season in every way for Ferrucci. And he's made a claim before he can win the championship next year. Maybe that is a bit far fetched, but if they go on the same trajectory they did this year, technically he's probably right.
I mean, a jump of 10 places in the space of a year with the same team, over 150 more points he earned this year, which is just outstanding. And it wasn't like he wasn't qualifying particularly well. Like, his qualifying average was 15th. He qualified outside the top 15 on 10 occasions. He was getting the job done on race day, and I don't think any driver was even close to being that fun to watch on race day, especially on the short ovals with some of the guts, some of the bravery that he showed. It's just been an astonishing rise, really, and it's only obviously the second time in his career that he's been with the same team for a second season. I think that continuity is part of really what's benefited both parties. But I mean, just to reiterate what you said, Dan, 11 top 10s. They had 1 last year. They had 3 top 15s last year. They had 14 top 15s on Ferrucci's side this year compared to the 3 last year. It's just astonishing, really. And I think he'll probably win a race next year. I wouldn't be surprised if him or Malukas win a race, for sure.
Ferrucci had the 3rd best average on ovals this year. Ridiculous.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, he's had an insane season, really. And I mean, like you said, absolutely embarrassed his teammate, really, and was very, very strong. And it will be interesting to see next year with Malukas, I think, how Malukas stacks up against him. Because I obviously think that will be a very, like, different dynamic to what he has now. And I think Malukas could quite easily match him, if not give him a good run for his money, which I think will be fun to watch. But yeah, I think he's had a very, very strong season. The results speak for themselves, really. The jump for the team speaks for itself. It's impressive.
I am fascinated to see how Ferrucci sort of fares in the face of this competition. I agree. I mean, as long as Foyt can kind of do what Shank did, I guess, and have both cars fighting on that equal sort of playing field.
Both had a similar upper hand against Robert's teammates, so it will be fascinating. And it's two drivers who you wouldn't say are top tier drivers, but very good, reliable drivers. And yeah, it's exciting, as you said. I think they've got a good chance at winning a race. I don't think Ferrucci is miles off that this year at times. So yeah, that's one of the storylines for next year for sure. That's going to be so intriguing seeing how those just stack up. Now, Ferrucci is definitely going to be top of what we've got already. It's just what category is he going in? I'd probably say got that dog but
I was going to say billboard-worthy, I think, just because of the sort of magnitude of the step forward. But I don't feel particularly strongly if you want to put it in that that dog.
I don't mind. You can be the mediator, Fleur.
Oh no. I don't know. I don't think I'd put him billboard-worthy. I think we've got to save that for like the top dog.
Sure. Got
that dog.
Ferrucci is definitely a driver who's got that dog. Though.
Absolutely.
Yeah. 100%.
Like we said, Daly was the epitome of it. Last time we said was the epitome. I think Ferrucci's even more so with the way he drives on short ovals and sort of underdog story. And he's definition of got that dog. We go on to Joseph Newgarden. When I was thinking about this episode like 4 months ago, as I always do, because I love this episode, I was thinking Newgarden will be by far the toughest one to judge because it's been such a bizarre season. You said this last week, 2 weeks ago now, where you genuinely believe that Newgarden's the qualification state Pete sort of just derailed him, which I think is a good assessment. But you look at it, he had 6 podiums this year, which is that's good. Only McLaughlin and Power had more. Yes, they are his teammates, but that's more than you think. But it was also a year absolutely littered with his own mistakes. Alabama, he made a key mistake. Detroit, he was a complete mess, basically. Laguna Seca went off twice. Mid-Ohio, I know he got unlucky with pit speed violations or whatever, but he made a mistake there, which caused that. You look at Toronto, I know that wasn't his fault. He had bad luck there, but you also look at the Milwaukee's, the Ericsson one, 50-50. Obviously, the race 2 was unlucky. So it was a year of great highs in the Indy 500, obviously winning Gateway alongside that. A year with very uncharacteristic mistakes and a year of awful luck at times. And obviously, St. Petersburg does just leave a bit of a shadow, more so because he was the race winner. And I also think of the way he sort of came out, where he said he knew about it in comparison to the others, also made him a bit more of a hang on, what's going on here? Like McLaughlin, I accidentally used it. Newgarden saying he knowingly used it, I think made him more of a victim than McLaughlin did, and also on the basis he won. So it is really hard to assess because it was such a mixed year. Look, he won the race, which is bigger than the championship in many ways, which you could automatically put him in billboard-worthy in many ways for that. But it was a year where you were left disappointed because after Long Beach, we both said this guy is going to be the champion.
Yeah, I mean, again, we did a proper deep dive on this the other week if people would like to listen and go back to the season review. But kind of just to give a potted version, it really did feel like St. Pete just really derailed him because, I mean, he could have won Long Beach. He did win St. Pete and won it regardless of the push to pass debacle. Really, it was such a dominant victory. That wasn't just a push to pass powered victory. But instead he comes away with a disqualification in 4th place after obviously being hit in the rear by Herter at Long Beach. And then from there it was just wild inconsistency that's kind of defined his last 2 seasons, I would say. And I mean, I think the picture of this season is the fact he finished inside the top 10 8 times. 7 of those 8 were top 5s, and 6 of the 7 top 5s were podiums. He finished outside the top 15 on 8 occasions. And I just think there was so much kind of negative attention around him this year, as I said the other week, that it's great if you're a driver like, say, Santino Ferrucci, who might embrace being this villain, but Newgarden is kind of a self-admitted kind of introvert, and this kind of villainization is just not something that I think he embraces. And I think to be the villain, you need to embrace it.
Yeah, literally what I was going to say. It was one of those seasons where when he was doing great, he was on the podium or winning. But when he wasn't, he was nowhere to be seen, or he was so far off the pace. And it was like almost surprising how inconsistent he was for someone of his caliber. Like winning back-to-back Indy 500s, you expect like a man like that to have a more consistent season. And I think if you like, when you look at the rest of the season, keeping that in mind, that just doesn't really seem, it doesn't seem representative almost, even though the mistakes he made and the bad results he had were indicative of his own mistakes. You know, there wasn't stuff out of his control largely. It was him and him making his own mistakes. And it was a very weird season for him. Very, very odd, not what I expected at all, especially from the like start of the season to like compared to the end. Very strange. Went from thinking he'd win the championship to him literally being 8th.
Do you know what's interesting? You know, last year we were just absolutely slanting Penske for how bad they were in qualifying.
Yeah,
top 3 qualifiers on average this year.
Well, I did note that actually, and I mean, they said last year, didn't they? They were putting a lot of emphasis on actually just focusing on being in a good position for 24, and that was absolutely the case, wasn't it? I mean, Newgarden, even without the push to pass debacle, he probably wouldn't have moved up in the championship more than a spot.
He would have moved up ahead of Kirkwood, and that's it. And look, there was a lot of mistakes, as I said. You look Uniseca, you look Alabama, you look Detroit, you look Mid-Ohio. And you look, he caused controversy in his other one in Gateway. We won't get onto that, otherwise we'll be here forever. Milwaukee made a mistake as well. And if we're looking at the list, I genuinely could make a case for him being in any of these tiers, to be completely honest. I can make a case for all 5, I think, if I wanted to. So I don't know. It's so hard because do you rank him on expectation? How much weight do you put into his Indy 500? Do you weigh him on the fact he had 6 podiums, which is the second most of any driver? What metric do we use here? Because there is just so much we can use.
I mean, you add a bit of weight to the 500, but ultimately, I think we're looking at the whole season. I would probably put him in bump day survivor above Ericsson.
Okay.
I think Joseph Newgarden, while his teammates were firmly kind of in that championship contention picture-ish, the fact that he's down in 8th and would be no higher than 6th even without the disqualification, that's pretty poor, because Penske were right there with Ganassi this year.
I also think you've got to factor that 500 performance in, because that shows the caliber of driver he is. So for him then to be so far down and have such a wish-washy season almost makes it worse.
That's a good point as well, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not again. As I said, I literally can make a case for any of them, I think, and a good one. But again, you don't want to put too much as an expectation, but you sort of have to some extent. And if I said Newgarden being in 9th at the start of the year and win the Indy 500, so 8th, I should say, I'd be like, what? I'll be mixed.
It's just like if you take the name away and that's not Joseph Newgarden, he'd probably be in that got that dog, but it's Joseph Newgarden, so.
So although it was a disappointing year for Joseph Newgarden, he did win the greatest spectacle in racing. And to remember that historic moment, you can buy the merchandise with all the Shell branding, which reflected that memorable moment. If you want to do that, you can head to the Formula Model Shop website, who sell one of those Newgarden Josephs, which you can pick up. It is the best place to get your IndyCar merchandise in the UK and the rest of Europe, because we know American shipping is very expensive.
You can use the discount code 5BOMB, or one word, FIVEBOMB, to gain 5% off products on the FMS site. Visit the highlights on the DIVEBOMB Motorsport Instagram account for links to an exclusive VIP section on the FMS store, courtesy of DIVEBOMB.
And you can head to the DIVEBOMB website and click on the banner, which leads you straight to the Formula Model Shop website, or go to formulamodelshop.co.uk.
Stay tuned for exclusive giveaways, events, and other content.
Let's go on to Kyle Kirkwood. Hopefully this is simpler waters. No peak performances like last year. No, well, he did get pole, actually, obviously, in Nashville, but no victories. But we've said this a few times. Kirkwood's performance, and I've spoken it a few weeks ago, was much better than it was a few years ago. Kirkwood had the 4th best average of anybody, 13 top 10s, which is the joint most of any driver in the field, 5 top 5s, and a singular podium in Toronto. And last year, like, we were praising Kirkwood for results, but we said this year he needs to be consistent. He lacks that consistency. You don't win titles through winning 2 races a season. You win titles by getting top 5s 10 times a season. And Kirkwood still isn't quite there, but he made the step up that we needed him to make and wanted to see him make. And look, he wasn't on the same peak performance as Herta. I don't think that's the main issue. He made a big step forward in ovals, in my opinion, as well. He had 4 top 10s on ovals, including obviously that pole, second best average in street circuits out of anyone. Qualifying wise, not bad. Average qualifying of 10th, 11 top 12 appearances, 7 top 6 appearances. It was a good year for Carl Kirkwood. As I said, it didn't have the peak performances. It wasn't flashy, but I thought it was good and a good sign of progress, which is what he needs to show. He's still the 3rd full season of IndyCar. It's still early days for him.
Yeah, obviously drivers aren't happy when they're not winning, but I mean, this is his 3rd year as an IndyCar driver. It's his 2nd season in this super competitive outfit. I mean, his 1st season with Andretti really being this force that looked like they could contend for the championship. And I think he made the step forward that kind of the team step forward kind of prompted, I guess. And he made the step forward that he needed to make. And I ultimately think it was a better season than last year. I mean, the points show that he was 68 points better off this year than he was last season, jumped up 4 places in the standings. He finished inside the top 10 only 7 times last year. I think consistency was a big problem. And I don't knock him for that. Like, 2nd year as an IndyCar driver, finding your feet still. He finished in the top 10 13 times this year. He only missed out 4 times. That was an increase of 6 on last year. Obviously, there was a whole thing last year about, his only top 5s for his wins. And you
told him that. You got no excuse.
And now all right, I propelled him on, didn't I? He finished inside the top 5 times this year, and only one of those was a podium. But I think the consistency, when his average race finish was the 4th best in the full-time field, like, I think it was a really good season. This was the sort of season he needed to grow into like this complete driver. And I feel like next year he could be on a par. Right, he's got the platform to be closer to being on a par with Herta at least.
He got caught up in crashes in Ira and Gateway as well, which might inflate stuff the wrong way.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's been a pretty impressively consistent season from him. Maybe you'd want a few more podium finishes, a few more top 5 finishes, but yeah, I mean, like, what was it, like 4 non-top 10 finishes is pretty crazy when you think 2 of those were where he was a victim of a crash. So I think that's quite impressive. Again, overall, like, top 4 overall finisher. It was a decent season from him. You can't fault him much from this season, I'd say.
I definitely got that dog. Definitely below Ferrucci for me. I'd probably say maybe below Rosenqvist as well, but that's...
I would say above Rosenqvist personally.
Yeah, I'd say above Rosenqvist.
Okay, I'll go with the crowd. That's fine. People are laughing. Look, in my opinion, Rosenqvist qualified very well, and he's in the sub team, so that's my reasons.
Yep. I can see a case for both. I just think Kirkwood's consistency was probably only bettered by Pillow.
Scott Dixon, this is probably one again where expectations we do need to take into account. I think one thing we can't forget is Long Beach was at the start of the season, but like that was ridiculous. That
was one of the best wins I've ever seen from any driver. That was just unbelievable.
Yeah, and obviously Detroit as well doesn't probably get as much credit as it deserves because of Long Beach, but Detroit as well was another veteran Scott Dixon performance.
It was another case of him kind of reigning in one of those just chaotic races, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were saying this in the last. Well, I think it was during that race. He wins all the chaotic races. We won Nashville a couple of years ago. He won Laguna last year. I mean, give him a strategy, it makes it work. But it was his lowest finish in the championship since 2016. When you look at last season, he had 6 podiums last season. You look at this year, a slight decrease at 5. Top 10s wise, that certainly went down. Top 10s wise this season, he's still a 10. He had 11, which isn't bad, but for someone of Scott Dixon's pedigree, you'd maybe expect a little bit more. 8 top 5s in there as well. When you compare that to last season, he had a few more than that. I think he had 11 last season. So it's a tough one because, Dixon still had these great performances, and there were occasions he dropped points basically for no fault of his own. Mid-Ohio dropped loads of points there. Portland dropped loads of points there. Those are both not really his fault. Road America, he had that dodgy tyre, lost a lot of points there as well. But then again, I say this, but everyone has their bad luck across the course of a season. And like even mid-season, people were saying Dixon will win the championship. If we think back then, and it sort of fizzled out, didn't it? Mid-season, Mid-Ohio sort of started it all, but it just sort of fizzled out after then a bit. It was a bit disappointing.
He led the championship after Detroit, and ultimately, when we are evaluating here, you're always going to put more weight on how they end the season. I think naturally, and I think based on where Dixon was, and I mean how well he usually ends seasons. Like he hadn't started the season this well since he won the championship in 2020 and won the first 3 or 4 races or something along those lines. And this year he got those 2 wins in the first 6 rounds, I think it is. And then after that, I don't know. It's a funny one. Like last year, he finished inside the top 7 in every race apart from when he was shoved into the wall by O'Ward and Long Beach. Like that was just a spectacular season, really. And if it wasn't for Palou, we'd be talking about one of the best championship wins we've seen in a long time. But yeah, it just felt like a bit of a step back this year. Like on your qualifying point, he only qualified inside the top 6 4 times, and I don't know. It just felt there were a lot of days that were just not like we were used to seeing from Dixon. I think Mid-Ohio was the kind of turning point, wasn't it? And that was obviously completely out of his control. Yeah, I think it's just the way it petered out. I mean, like it feels like he had a few weak oval races. Like I think the way that Nashville ended his season was particularly kind of poor. I think Palou actually remarked afterwards about how it's just been a tricky year for Dixon and things have just been going wrong for him. So hard to categorize, really is.
Yeah, I think it's similar, but nowhere near as extreme as like Newgarden's season of someone coming in with pretty high expectations, having a strong start to the season, and then just not really happening for them, especially because obviously it's Scott Dixon. You expect some great things, and you saw that in like places like Detroit and Long Beach. You saw those like glimpses of how good he can be, but it just didn't seem to sustain itself throughout the season. And I think that's why it makes it difficult, because he just, I remember thinking, oh, he actually could win this, guys. And then just suddenly he didn't seem like he was even in the conversation anymore. So it was kind of a weird season for him.
The thing is, it's not like we've seen errors from him either. It just hasn't quite been what we've been accustomed to seeing. He doesn't feel like he's been a factor that much, really.
I'd put him personally behind Rosenqvist.
Oh, you'd put him that high?
Because look, long performances like Long Beach, you can't put him in the middle because he is still that good. And look, as I said, he still had how many podiums? I can't remember. 7 podiums or something. So 5 podiums. I don't know why I said 7. It's 5 podiums. No, it's 4 podiums. It's 4 podiums. But look, with performances like Long Beach, you can't put him in the middle.
Well, maybe, but at the same time, I think he finished lower in the championship than this once, maybe.
I don't know.
2004, 2005, he finished 10th and 13th. And since he finished 6th once, and this is as bad as it's been.
I would say Dixon has had not a lot of bad luck, but he has had his fair share of bad luck. His mistakes weren't plentiful. There was Alabama, fair enough, but that was one.
No, I agree. I don't disagree with that. I just think there've been so many days. There were so many races.
I still think maybe at the bottom of Got That Dog, but he's got to be in Got That Dog for me somewhere.
I would have put him top of the middle, like Ohio, ahead of Rossi. I just think the fact that the 6-time champion has finished, well, it's his joint 3rd worst ever finish in the championship.
Oh, is it going to be my decider again?
It is.
Oh, no. I hate this. I don't know, because I was leaning to putting him in the middle like Ohio, just because, again, the same reasoning we had with Newgarden. It's you have that expectation of them, And if we'd been looking at like anyone else and it didn't have a name and they'd had the performance they had in Long Beach, it'd be in Got That Dog, but it is Scott Dixon. So you just expect a bit more from him. So I think he's either at like the very bottom of Got That Dog or at the very top of the middle, like Ohio.
Which is both what we said. So
yeah, but I don't want to make the decision.
Haven't progressed anywhere.
Well,
Got That Dog is less field, so we're putting him there. We might change it later. We'll have a look at the end and see if we change stuff later. Here we go. The yearly Patter Award, where I've sort of got to start the conversation. As pretending not to be the award ultra of the group. He won races, and he won 3 of them, which is the joint most of anybody, although I don't really count St. Petersburg. I really don't think he counts St. Petersburg either, in truth.
I keep forgetting about St. Pete. I kept saying after his second win of the season, it was his second win of the season.
6 podiums, which is 1 less than last year, which isn't bad. But there were O'Ward made a few of his mistakes. Long Beach, Alabama, for example, Toronto. He had mechanicals in Milwaukee and Gateway, which really cost him. And there were also times where Aaron McLaren were just slow. So it's a mixture of everything this season. O'Ward was still the best overall finishing McLaren on average and in points. He was still the best qualifier on average, bar Larson. So such a mixed season. Like, I think he drove superbly in Milwaukee Race 1. I thought he drove absolutely superbly mid-Ohio. Still hasn't had a pole in 2 years, which is rather bizarre. And even his second places, Indy 500, could have easily been a win. Nashville, that could have been a win if traffic came to him in the right place. Even Iowa, I know it's a bit different the repace, but he felt he had a faster car than McLaughlin, but you couldn't overtake. So there's a very, 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 very small scenario here where he could have 6 wins this year. So there's a bit of a wit because look, McLaren aren't at the level I think they should be at by now, and we've seen that and we've talked about this. But he was still miles clear of Rossi. On overall, yes, he made more mistakes than Rossi, but performance is more important, really.
Yeah, I think he outperforms that package, and I think if he was a Ganassi or a Penske, he would be contending for the championship. But you can't ignore the mistakes either. Like, you look at that early part of the season where he finishes 16th Long Beach. Barber was just a catastrophic race where he was just making errors and hitting people left, right, and centre. The Indy GP, there was just no pace really, and yeah, that's not necessarily his fault. Toronto makes his own error. Gateway was mechanical. In the second Milwaukee was also mechanical, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But I think you've also got those mistakes that did happen. So I think the peaks are there. Of course they are. And it was was it a step forward from last year? I mean,
I'd say so. He got 3 wins more.
Yeah. I agree. But at the same time, I think last year we kind of marveled about how after those few races where he was desperate, etc., and we felt his kind of mentality and his approach was all wrong. He finished inside the top 10 14 times last year compared to only 10 times this year. Like 3 less top 5s as well this season. I still think it was. It's hard to say. I don't think it was better nor worse, really. It was kind of similar in a slightly different way. I think so. Yeah, it was mixed. It was mixed, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of agree with that. You know, he had wins, but equally he had some races where what was he doing? You know, and some pretty shocking races or some like a lot of just random mistakes, I'd say.
I do think O'Ward deserves a lot more credit than maybe people give him. I know I'm probably the wrong person to say this, but he's been with Aaron McLaren since day one, and it's been off track, on track. Such a weird year for the team. We've talked about saga of the 6. We've talked about even the saga of the 7 at points this year. So much uncertainty at times, but O'Ward was the one person who sort of brought light to that team throughout courses of the year, and I think there's a growing suggestion that actually he's really outperforming the team he's in. And as you said, he should really be he's a driver who should be competing for championships, but do McLaren give him the package? Because there's days like Indianapolis, as you said, there's days like Portland where they're just slow. They have no explanation for it. They are just simply slow as a team. And these were places that they both got podiums last year. And you never see Ganassi or Penske have days where they're just slow. That isn't them, but McLaren have those days. That's why there is a growing suggestion for O'Ward. Is he in the wrong team in some ways? And O'Ward's done a great job as a team leader. And look, we've seen how Rosenqvist has done. O'Ward trounced Rosenqvist over 2 or 3 seasons at McLaren. He's absolutely eliminated any suggestions that Rossi was close to his performance level. Got that dog, almost definitely. I mean, you could make a case of Billboard, considering he was the one who started this Billboard.
He should be on billboards, but I think this particular billboard, not quite.
I'm neutral if he goes above or below Ferrucci.
I would slot him just below Ferrucci, I think.
I was going to agree, so that's fine. Last year I did this.
Just left him there.
Yeah, I think his own mistakes cost him. Ferrucci didn't make it. Like if he didn't make any mistakes, he'd be a billboard-worthy. But he lost the top 5 in Toronto. He lost a good result in Alabama. He lost the top 10 on Long Beach. So
Ferrucci ended the season with more top 10s than O'Ward.
Yeah, but 6 less podiums. Will Power, obviously a much better year. A year where he could focus a bit more on what was going on. And obviously for the majority of the season, the main championship protagonist. Like O'Ward, actually very similar in quite a few ways. 3 wins. He had a bit more seconds with 4. Similar to O'Ward, all their top 5s, the first or seconds, which is really weird. Anyway, that's a weird trend between the two of them. Qualifying wise, Power was the second best qualifier in the field. Which makes sense for IndyCar's best ever qualifier, even though he didn't get pole. 3rd best average on road and street, 3rd best average on ovals, so consistent in that regard. 3rd best overall average finish. But again, he made mistakes which cost him. Indy 500. I know Gateway wasn't his fault, but that really cost him as well. So Toronto cost him hugely. Again, it's a bit like O'Ward, where really great peaks, but mistakes really did cost him. Nashville obviously wasn't his fault as well, but he lost a lot of points there. And there is a scenario where Power could easily be the champion, but mistakes let him down as opposed to Pelot.
I feel like on the kind of mistakes to misfortune ratio, Power had a few more mistakes compared to the obvious things that weren't his fault. But again, just kind of doing my run through the results, Indy was a huge error. I don't know what happened in the race, because I mean those Penske cars were rockets all month, and Power was just having his car just looked like a real handful in the race. First Iowa race, he finished 18th. Why did that happen?
He qualified really bad. I got unlucky with a caution, I think.
So that's misfortune. Toronto was, I mean, he would be the first to admit that was stupid, running into McLaughlin. Gateway was unfortunate, obviously. Nashville, similarly, I think just Milwaukee will be the one that probably plays on his mind the most. He could have easily, won that race, should have been on the podium. Spins on a restart. It was a rookie error from one of the most experienced guys in the series, really. But that's kind of the negatives, and there were so many positives. Like obviously last year was just a complete write-off. And as I've said so many times, this year felt like the real kind of the true defense of his 2022 championship. And I think his attempt to defend that, if we're going to put it that way, was very valiant. I mean, it's funny, like looking at this year compared to last, like he got the same amount of top 10s, 1 more top 5, but it's the podium tally of 7 to 4, and kind of the difference there is the fact that he won 3 races after that 2-year drought, which no doubt will have weighed on him. And I mean, he still got really unlucky this year with 4 front rows and no pole and some extremely tight margins on multiple occasions.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was an impressive season, especially coming from everything last season. And yeah, like you said, that mental impact of going from a incredibly difficult time in your life outside of the sport you're doing or your like career, to then come back to it, be doing as well as he is, and be really showing I'd say who he is as a driver this season. Yes, a few like mistakes and issues, but overall a very impressive season. Like, especially when you think of everything he's come back from, like in the break and from last year. Like, yeah, I mean, I think it's impressive.
I think you'll disagree with me, which is fine. I'd put him at top of Got That Dog because I think his mistakes really did cost him.
No, I was going to say exactly that, actually. And I mean, it's the willpower Got That Dog category. He is the unofficial sponsor of it.
All three people in the press conference are there. The infamous press conference.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Scott McLaughlin. I'm very passionate about this, and I'm hardly a McLaughlin fan. Where I've seen a lot of top 10 drivers of the season reviews from people. And McLaughlin's 3rd, 4th, 5th, and I just think that's ridiculous. Because when you take everything into account, McLaughlin has had an absolutely superb year, and the statistic is true. If it wasn't for 2 seconds push to pass, we'd be sitting here discussing McLaughlin as a 2024 IndyCar champion. Yes, I know the races might have gone different in the end, but let's say they didn't, McLaughlin would be the 2024 IndyCar champion, and our chat would be so utterly different. He didn't gain an advantage from that. We know he finished 3rd, and McLaughlin's argument was it was accidental. But anyway, I'm not digging into that rabbit hole again. McLaughlin's qualifying best of anybody bar Larson, which we're not really counting, and it's by 1.5 positions. His average is better than anybody else's. 15 top 12s in 17 races, which is insane. 9 top 6s, 5 poles. His overall qualifying is absolutely ridiculous. An average of 2.4 with 4 poles, 2 seconds. I mean, let down by a 9th for Nashville. Road and street, again, 5th best on street, 6th best on road qualifying. That's just his qualifying performances. Road courses, 4th best average of anybody. Ovals, best average of anybody by 3 positions. It's absolutely insane. Like, the stats are ridiculous for McLaughlin. Joint most wins of anybody, joint most podiums of anybody. 12 top 10s across the year. What let him down again was mistakes. Detroit, for example, Laguna Seca. He got unlucky in Toronto as well. And obviously St. Petersburg. And Long Beach obviously had a mechanical issue. So many things went against McLaughlin this year. And I think he was so hard done by to finish 3rd in the championship because he had an utterly ridiculously good year. It was so good. People aren't giving enough credit. This guy is against one of the most formidable drivers in the last 10 years in Joseph Newgarden. Will Powers, 15-year IndyCar veteran. This guy came over from supercars in Australia 3 years ago and is already one of the top 3 drivers in the series and has been his teammates 2 years in a row. This guy isn't getting enough credit for what he's doing. It's crazy. Like, his season was insane.
I think it's one of the most remarkable things we've actually seen in the whole of motorsport. I completely agree. I think people just completely undervalue, and it gets kind of brushed under the carpet what a job he's doing. This is his 4th complete year as a single-seater driver in his career. And this is now in his 3rd season and his 4th season, beating these 2 guys, finishing as the best Chevrolet-powered car. It's astonishing what he's doing. And I know we've spoken about misfortune and mistakes for so many other drivers, but for McLaughlin, it simply is different because on the occasions of all these other drivers, we don't know how they would have gone on to convert in those races where something went awry. With McLaughlin, we know that he finished 3rd in St. Pete, and that was simply taken away because of something that was, well, claimed to be inadvertent. And I think in his case, 2 seconds of push to pass, I don't even know if it was that much in that single press, did nothing. I think even the video shows, I don't think he benefited at all when he used it. Like, yeah, I think he would have been possibly the worthiest champion in the field, really. And I think he will look back and be his own harshest critic and look at the mistakes that he did make, and he made those mistakes. Laguna Seca was critical, colliding with Power. Detroit as well was just a mistake, running completely by himself that he should not have made. But in addition to St. Pete, you have incidents such as, he's going to wrap up 4th in Toronto if he's not punted into the wall by Power of all people. He comes away from Long Beach with 5 points, plumb last in the championship. He essentially missed the first 2 rounds. and he's still within 40 points of winning the championship. I mean, that is astonishing, really. And yeah, I don't think it's an understatement to say this guy's probably one of the possibly top 3 best drivers in the world. I think he's in the conversation, I would say. I know that's to open a whole new can of worms, but I think in terms of what he's able to produce in all sorts of different machinery and what he's just jumped into an open wheel car for the first time and is doing within less than a 5-year period is just astonishing, really.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the way that drivers like Marcus Armstrong and Callum Ilott talk about just making the change from like F2 to IndyCar, and you listen to them talk about how it's really difficult to get used to IndyCar and the differences and the like struggles of that, versus coming just into single seaters and doing as well as he is. It's insane. It's actually, yeah, like astounding. And I think his season's been crazy impressive, and if it hadn't been for those first 2 rounds, we'd be having a very different conversation, and it'd be a very different season, really, which is a shame for him. But I don't think this will be the last time he's at the top of the standings, and I wouldn't be surprised if he won a championship, because that's the standard of driver he is, really.
Right, no discussion, because there is no discussion.
He slides onto the biggest of billboards.
And then we go on to Colton Herta. I think we both said pre-season that Herta, needed to be the most improved driver or something. He was, certainly. His last 2 seasons were utterly shambolic for a driver of his standards. And he comes away from 2024, 2 wins, 6 podiums, second in the championship, his best result ever. 2 pole positions throughout, 3 pole positions across the course of the year, an oval victory, his first oval podium, 13 top 10s, most of any driver. It was a great season. Best average finish in street courses. No, he didn't. Best average qualifying on street courses, and second best average on road and street overall. It was a great year for Herta in comparison to previous years, and we've said this. Andretti have clearly benefited from downsizing throughout the course of the year, and Herta's shown that is both. Well, his win in Toronto was just dominant. His win in Nashville was very impressive too, and it's what we expect of Colton Herta. And I'm glad he's in this position, because he's a driver who is fully capable of this position and should be, and has just been let down by 2 seasons, which certainly are not good by his standards. It was a good year. It was a good year for Colton. I still am a bit bemused how he ended up second in the standings, because I felt like he was never even close to being second in the standings all year long, but he ended up there. So
yeah, I think that was probably the most surprising thing about the final race of the season, to be honest. On Herta, I mean, he was about 150 points better off than he was the season before, maybe even more than that. He made a gain of 8 places on the 10th place finish that we've seen the last 2 years prior to 24. So, I mean, it was just a massive leap. I mean, consistency-wise, I don't think Herta's ever been this strong, to be honest. 13 top 10 finishes. He had 8 last season, which wasn't even half of the races. 10 times in the top 5, which is, I mean, Palou was the only other driver even in double figures, which is super, super impressive, because that is a consistent delivery of a really kind of high peak level as well. And he was only on the podium once last year. I mean, that kind of emphasizes just how much he struggled, I think. Finally got the oval win over the line, which again was a long time coming. I'm not really sure how he hadn't even had an oval podium before the second race in Milwaukee. That was a stat that seemed to confuse absolutely everybody. It just felt like the consistency he found that this year. It was just a shame for him, obviously, that Indy, he possibly had the best car in the field. I think at the midway point of that race, I think he crashed just after midway, didn't he? He was possibly the favourite to win. Threw it away with what was no doubt a bizarre incident, but I think everyone's saying that it was an error, even himself. Follows that up with Detroit, where obviously he makes a mistake there as well. But it's kind of all we saw on the mistakes from him. Like, he obviously got caught out. I mean, was it the first? Oh no, sorry, it was the first Iowa race that he should have won, and Palou spun as he was in the pits, or he could have won at least. Milwaukee has a wheel come off, so again, every driver had some sort of circumstance, even Palou, that kind of set them back somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, I think Herta's season was very, very impressive in the end. The fact that he ended up second in the standings is kind of wild, but he kind of just came from nowhere. And then it was second, but go him. So I think it was honestly a very impressive season. I think this is kind of what I wanted to see from him. Like, this is the kind of level of performance I want him to be putting in. But that's also because I like him. So I want him to be winning more races all the time, please. Like, as far as mistakes and issues go, he had about as many as the next driver. I wouldn't say he was making mistakes. I wouldn't say he had a huge amount of issues, but like you just said, every single driver came away with some kind of weird circumstance or issue that set them back. And that's what he had. It wasn't like a string of issues or anything like that. It was a solid season. It was a really strong, solid season for him, and I'd like to see him do it again, if not better, next year.
Below McLaughlin, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah.
Easy peasy. And we end off with the champion, Alex Palou. Me and Archie had this debate, I can't remember what race it was, maybe post-Milwaukee or somewhere, where is this better than last year? I wouldn't say so, but I would also say the field got more competitive this year. So, and look, the results are still ridiculous, isn't it? 2 wins isn't impressive, but when you look at 13 top 5s, that's insane. And obviously, Milwaukee race 2 out of his control. Detroit probably wasn't running for a top 5, but did get unfortunate. That was a top 10. Iowa 1 was obviously his own mistake. But yeah, just another like supreme year. Obviously, the best average finish of anybody in the field. This overall, can't race in ovals. Yes, he still hasn't got a win, but he's still got he got more than 2 top 5s in ovals. That is wrong with me. He got, let me have a look. He got 4 top 5s in ovals. Obviously, one of them was Iowa where he crashed, and his season fizzled out a bit quietly. In Nashville, I think it was a bit underwhelming the way that all planned out from a championship perspective, but it was an insane year. A very, very worthy champion. I've got no issues with that. And look, he's solidified himself as one of the modern greats.
Yep. I think if anything, it actually just underscores how 2023 was one of the greatest season whole performances there has ever been. I mean, he was in the top 8 every single race. This
is the 2024 episode, Archie, by the way.
Yes, I know, but like it just is. Like, it's impossible. Like, thinking about how this year, it feels like he was near perfect. Last season, he pretty much was about as perfect as you could ever be. And this year was still just outrageous. I mean, every time he was in the top 10, which was 13 times, he was in the top 5. And, okay, 6 podiums compared to his lofty 10 last year isn't as good. But, I mean, he doesn't even need to be at his scintillating best to win the championship, which I think just emphasizes the status that he is going to hold whenever his IndyCar career is up.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to add other than it's insane, and he's insane, and his consistency as well is just the fact that like any race he's finishing basically without an issue is a top 5 finish is crazy.
It's really special, and I think we need to kind of soak it in as we are watching it, what we are seeing here, because I mean, this is a guy who left Dale Coyne race. I mean, he came over initially from Super Formula with kind of an unknown quantity, really, and there's this whole story, and I've got a feature up on the site if you go to our IndyCar section about how it was really the month of May in 2020, in his rookie year, in fact, when after an impressive qualifying, his pit box was pretty near to the number 9 stand, and Mike Hull and Chip Ganassi were observing him. And just from what they saw in the pit lane, and there were stories of him qualifying 7th with a broken weight jacket, they decided, well, I mean, there weren't going to be any changes, but then Felix Rosenqvist, there's the bombshell that he's leaving for Aaron McLaren. They suddenly have a seat free. They don't have to think twice. And this is a guy who, okay, he had a podium in one of his first few races, but he had an unassuming rookie year. He had a few highs, but finished 16th in the championship, and you wouldn't say that was anything spectacular, but they they knew this guy was something special. And within 4 years at Ganassi, he has 3 championships. And the only year where he kind of fell off a little bit was obviously the year where you had the big aspect to this storybook as well, which is all the legal proceedings.
I'm a strong believer he should go below McLaughlin. We disagreed here. I said McLaughlin was my driver of the season. And as I said, if it wasn't for St. Petersburg, we'd be in a completely different perspective.
Yep. I mean, we kind of spoke about this, the season review, that McLaughlin was our driver of the season. So I would just slot below behind. But I mean, they are about on a par as you can get.
There you are, ladies and gents. My favourite episodes are done. That is the 2024 driver review, part 1 and 2, both done. There is the final tier list. We'd encourage you, please share your own. Send it to us on Instagram, send us on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. Send us your own tier list. How did you think the drivers panned on? Did you agree? Anything you disagreed on? Let us know. We'd like to see what you think of your own tier lists. We put it on Reddit the other day. We got some results there. So send your own. We'd absolutely love to see them and see how they stack up against ours. But that's the tier list. We've got about 1 or 2 things to touch on very quickly. I mean, the first one is, we mentioned us testing next week. We won't touch on it. We'll touch on it next week once you've got a bit more on it, because there will be a bit more about this test. But last week, Jamie Chadwick tested for Andretti in our first IndyCar test at Barb Motorsports Park alongside Felipe Drugovich, who did his first test for Chip Ganassi Racing. Drugovich definitely is in contention for a seat next year. Chadwick has been suggesting should do a part-time schedule. That remains to be seen, though. Drugovich did quite a few more laps than Chadwick did. He was about a second quicker. I think Chadwick's team just said she struggled on the high-speed corners. She doesn't quite have the physical capabilities yet. She's also very small, apparently. I mean, I've never seen her height, but apparently she's absolutely tiny.
She is really small.
Which she struggled with. But a good opportunity for both. Cool to see Chadwick in a car, and interesting to see another F2 driver was shipping off to IndyCar, and Felipe Drugovich.
Yeah, I mean, there were reports or rumours, weren't there, that he'd actually neglected to test with them last season, possibly. But I think from the quotes, all this information has kind of come via Racer that they are really impressed with him. They were really impressed with what he delivered. And yeah, Chadwick, it's just about, and I mean, before last season, she put in so much work to grow physically ahead of her sophomore year in Indy Next, and it really paid off. And by all accounts, she's ready to put in that work again if it means achieving this target of IndyCar. And I think it was something put up on her website that she was targeting 8 or 6 to 8 races, which was then taken down. I still think a second or third season in Indy Next, kind of a second really meaningful season in Indy Next would really benefit her, because I'm confident she'd be a championship contender and a real front runner there with the likes of Caio Collet. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to judge kind of where she would be if she was to step up, but I think it's important that she is absolutely ready and not just rushed into the seat. Yeah,
it's difficult with charters though, isn't it? Because you can't really run her on a part-time schedule, because then she's got to qualify against the premiers of Callum Ilott and probably Robert Schwartzman, which will be quite difficult. So unless Coyne puts her in on a part-time schedule alongside, let's say, Sowery and Legg, for example, that's probably the best option for her, because I'd be concerned if she was rushed into an IndyCar seat and had to qualify for races.
Yeah, you don't want to see any driver rushed into an IndyCar seat, really, and especially I think because there is naturally so much attention on her, and there always has been. Look at the scrutiny of her first season in Indy Next, for instance. So yeah, it's important that she's ready, and as soon as she is ready, I'd be confident that she could be competitive, because to be only a second off an F2 champion on one of the most physical tracks. I know she's got track knowledge, but I think that's pretty good going, I would say.
History. It's my turn. 1916 to 1920. Obviously, the period of the First World War, but I've still got a story that I managed to conjure up. So we're going to go to 1916 and start my period and the Indianapolis 500. What was different about this Indianapolis 500 compared to every other one? Do we know?
I don't know.
I don't expect you to. This is the only Indianapolis 500 which wasn't 500 miles long.
I was going to say that, but thought it was just stupid. So I didn't say it.
This was the 6th International 300-mile sweepstake race. It was still titled the Indianapolis 500. It was still promoted as the Indianapolis 500, which is rather interesting. However, it was 300 miles long, 120 laps. The reason why it got reduced is, well, there's a belief that it was due to World War One. It actually isn't. So the Speedway manager at the time, or the Speedway president, who at the time was a man named, I will find it for you, Carl G. Fisher, basically believed that the 500-mile races were too long and boring, and people weren't engaging in these 500 races. Obviously, this is when they were going for 6 hours, as we said the other day. So he believed if you made the race shorter, it'd be more appealing to fans. Still happened on Memorial Day. They changed the start time, but they just believed a shorter race would be more appealing to the fans. Long story short, it wasn't. That's why they went back to 500 miles and have remained ever since, because it simply wasn't interesting. This is the shortest field ever. Sorry, smallest field ever. Only had 21 cars in this Indianapolis 500. And as we sort of touched on, this was the war period. So there was a very unique thing which actually happened in September, where for the only time until 1993, there was another motor racing event held at Indianapolis. This was the only time until the NASCAR came to Indianapolis in 1994 that there was an event outside of the Indianapolis 500. And this was the only time, as I said, there was a different race held. And in September, they hosted something called the Harvest Auto Racing Classic. There was a 20-mile race, there was a 50-mile race, and there was a 100-mile race, all held in September, as we said. It's called the Harvest Race. You got I think the winner of the 20-mile race received $400. The winner of the 50-mile race won $700, and the winner of the 100-mile race won $3,500. All three races were won by a man called Johnny Aitken, driving in a Peugeot. And yeah, as I said, it was the only time outside of Indianapolis 500 that an event was held at IRS, which was absolutely fascinating. And in 2020, in the COVID restricted season, much like the war, put a bit of a halt to everything. The reason why they held this race actually was because they were concerned that revenue would go down because of the war. So because America hadn't joined the war yet, they were concerned that they wouldn't host the Indianapolis 500 next year. So wanted a way of just bolstering revenue. Because obviously the Speedway was in a precarious situation. It was still fairly new. It was 7 years old. So as I said, 2020 in the COVID-struck season, they had to add more races to the IndyCar schedule. One of them was the IndyCar Harvest Grand Prix, which was named after the Harvest Auto Racing Classic held in 1916. Much like my last issue, there's much debates about champions going on this era and unofficial champions and official champions, but that's too boring. I found this one more interesting. So there's my fun fact of the week, that the 1916 Indianapolis 500 was the only one that hosted a 300-mile race, and they hosted a further event in September because they were afraid of revenue cuts for the war.
Becoming all the wiser every week.
Well, this is a fascinating segment. I'm glad we've done it. This is a really fun segment. So, next season, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be glad to know it's the first official off-seasoning episode.
Next season.
Next week. It feels like a season that's straight, doesn't it? Next week is the first off-seasoning episode for a very long time. And as you all know, we love off-season. It's weird and wonderful ways. I mean, the first off-seasoning, what we will do is we will look over our prediction results from February, I think it was, which is absolutely crazy to say. Zach Brown had his open letter, so we're going to react to that. We're going to catch up on a few other bits of news, as we said, there's a test going on this week, so we'll recap that as well. But it should be a cracking episode. But for this one, yes,
I was just going to say I'll do my St. Pete countdown at the end of every episode. So we're recording on Saturday. It is 146 days until we see cars on track, and by the time this goes live, it will be 143.
Anyway, that's it for the driver reviews. We hope you enjoyed it, because as you all know, I love this episode of debates. Fleur, I've got to say thank you for joining. Hopefully you have enjoyed the last two episodes ranking all the drivers, and I'm sure you'll be back sometime in the future. But thanks for joining us on for the last 2 weeks.
It's been fun. Thank you for having me.
No worries at all. But from all three of us, that's all we've got time for this week. Stay tuned for next week. Stay tuned for the rest of off season. We're going to be here every week, no matter what's happened. There's been some precarious moments in the past, but we made it last year. We'll make it this year. So, as I said, thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for listening. Send us your tier list, interact with us, send us any feedback you have for the podcast. It's always appreciated. But most importantly, we'll see you next time.